I've always been a light sleeper, the kind of person who wakes up at the slightest sound. It's a habit I developed growing up in a noisy household, where the constant bustle of life meant you had to be alert. Even now, living alone, that sensitivity to noise has stuck with me. Sometimes it's a curse, like when a car alarm goes off at 3 o'clock in the morning. But other times, it's a blessing, or at least that's what I told myself before that night. It was a Friday evening, and I had settled into bed later than usual around midnight. I wasn't particularly tired, but I had a long day ahead of me and knew I needed the rest. The night was quiet, unusually so. No distant hum of traffic, no barking dogs, not even the wind rustling the trees outside my window. Just silence, thick and oppressive. I should have taken comfort in the stillness, but it felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I must have drifted off at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to a faint rustling sound. It was so quiet that, at first, I wasn't sure if I had actually heard it or if it was just a remnant of some half-forgotten dream. I lay there, perfectly still, my heart beating a little faster than usual. The sound was coming from outside my bedroom window. It was probably just the wind, I told myself, though deep down I knew it wasn't. The wind doesn't make you feel like you're being watched. I forced myself to stay calm, rationalizing that it could be anything. A raccoon, a stray cat, maybe even a neighbor's dog that had wandered into my yard. But the more I listened, the more I realized the sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, careful. Slowly, I turned my head to look at the window. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of moonlight peeked through the gap where they didn't quite meet. I stared at that small strip of light, my heart pounding in my chest, waiting for something to move, for something to break the stillness. But nothing happened. The rustling had stopped, and now there was only silence. After a few tense moments, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was probably just an animal, I reassured myself again. There was no reason to be scared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every instinct was telling me that I wasn't alone. I lay there for what felt like hours, my eyes glued to the window, waiting for the sound to return. But it didn't. The house was completely silent, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. I had almost convinced myself to close my eyes and go back to sleep when I heard it again. This time, a soft, deliberate tap against the glass. My breath caught in my throat as I sat up, my eyes locked on the window. I couldn't see anything from my bed, so I slowly swung my legs over the side, the cold floor sending a shiver up my spine. Every nerve in my body was on edge as I stood up, each step toward the window feeling like I was walking to my doom. When I finally reached the window, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the curtain, my mind racing with all the possibilities of what might be on the other side. I knew I had to look, had to see what was out there, but the fear of what I might find was paralyzing. Finally, I steeled myself and pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The yard was bathed in pale moonlight, the shadows from the trees stretching long across the grass. For a moment, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The tree branches swayed gently in the breeze, and everything looked peaceful. But then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing by the large oak tree near the edge of the yard. The figure was motionless, almost blending in with the darkness, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there, just standing, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a trick of the light? Maybe a tall branch or some debris caught in the tree? But as I strained to see more clearly, I realized with a sinking feeling that it was none of those things. It was a person. My mind raced. Who would be out there at this hour just standing in my yard? I didn't recognize the figure, and from what I could tell, they were wearing dark clothing, making it even harder to make out any details. I thought about grabbing my phone to call the police, but something stopped me. What if they heard me? What if they saw me standing here, staring back at them? I slowly backed away from the window, careful not to make any sudden movements. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't given any indication that they knew I was watching, but the feeling of being seen, of being the target of someone's gaze, was overwhelming. I felt like prey, trapped in my own home. Once I was far enough from the window, I hurried to grab my phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to unlock it, my mind a blur of panic and fear. Should I call the police? My parents? A friend? What would I even say? "There's someone in my yard" sounded so trivial, so easy to dismiss, but the terror I felt was anything but. Before I could make a decision, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from outside the window. I froze. The phone slipped from my grasp, landing on the bed. The figure was moving, coming closer. I couldn't bring myself to look out the window again. The fear that I would see them standing right outside, just inches away from me, was too much. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet in my haste to get away from the window. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I couldn't think straight. I was trapped in my own fear. The footsteps grew louder, more defined, until they stopped just outside my bedroom wall. I could hear the faint rustle of clothing, the sound of someone breathing. They were right there, just a few feet away, separated only by a thin pane of glass and a flimsy curtain. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. The seconds stretched into minutes, the silence more deafening than the footsteps had been. And then, without warning, there was another tap on the glass. Louder this time, more insistent. I bit down on my lip to keep from screaming, my back pressed against the far wall as if I could somehow disappear into it. I wanted to run, to get out of the house, but I couldn't bring myself to move. What if they saw me? What if they followed? Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with tension. I strained to hear any sign of movement, any indication that the figure was still there. But there was nothing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I waited, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, but there was no further sound. Slowly, I inched toward the window, my heart hammering in my chest. I had to know if they were still out there. I had to see. With trembling hands, I reached for the curtain and pulled it back just enough to peek outside. The yard was empty. The figure was gone. For a moment, I stood there, staring out at the empty yard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had the figure been a figment of my imagination, conjured up by a sleep-deprived mind? But the fear I had felt, the terror that had gripped me, was all too real. I pulled the curtain back further, scanning every inch of the yard for any sign of the intruder. But there was nothing. No shadowy figure, no footsteps, not even a disturbance in the grass. It was as if they had never been there at all. I closed the curtain and backed away from the window, my mind racing. What should I do? Should I call the police and report it? Even though there was nothing to show them? No proof that anyone had been there? Or should I just try to forget it? Convince myself that it had been a nightmare or a trick of the light. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Couldn't. Every noise, every creak of the house set me on edge, my heart pounding in my chest. I stayed in bed, the covers pulled up to my chin, my eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling, waiting for the dawn to come and chase away the shadows. When morning finally came, I forced myself to get up and go outside. The yard was peaceful, bathed in the soft light of the early sun, and everything looked normal. But as I stood there, staring at the spot where the figure had been. A chill ran down my spine. I could still feel the presence of whoever or whatever had been there watching me. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the memory of that night lingered in the back of my mind, gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that the figure might come back. Every time I passed by the window, I half expected to see someone standing there, waiting. That night, I double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows, my heart racing as I went through the house, making sure everything was secure. But no matter how many times I checked, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, I tried to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But deep down, I knew that I would never feel safe in this house again, because whoever had been out there wasn't just some random intruder. They had been watching me, waiting for me to notice them. And the worst part, I had no idea why.